Hello again. It's I, your friendly host, Ziggy Salvation. So, it worked, right? You guys have reached out, you guys have sent DMs, you've sent emails, and one of the most common thing that I've come across is there's one race that everyone kind of was curious about, and it's, what is a Nerubian? You know, we interact with them, we've slaughtered them in Northrend, we've killed them throughout Kalimdor, but no one really knows that there's quite a rich background, yeah, of where they come from. So let's break into that a little bit, yeah? You know, what exactly is a Nerubian? And Nerubians are an ancient race, right? They're highly intelligent arachnoids. They kind of, their native realm is Northrend, right? They're kind of at the cap of the world, or the roof of the world, as it's been referenced. But that was back, you know, the Lich King kind of crushed that whole Dark Empire, and once he did, they kind of went across the rest of those Arctic tundras after they were pushed out of their glacial subterranean homes that were there for so long. They are pushed now into what, you know, we know as an instance these days as John the Root, but that was their kingdom, you know? And it was kind of like this gigantic web of colony. So as, you know, that's the most recent thing was, you know, our guy Arthas pushed them out. But if you want to look at an earlier history, to really go back, their original foe was the trolls. Fought them for thousands of years, but the trolls never really succeeded a victory over the Akir, which is another word that we've heard, but not really. You don't really delve into it too much, unless, you know, it's there. It's just a matter of coming across it. And the Akir, again, are another ancient race. They're sentient insects. You know, it's believed they were born out of the old gods' matter, if you will. Like think 1987 Ninja Turtles, and we are known that the Ninja Turtles kind of crawled in the ooze and became who they are today. The Akir were the same sort of thing. They were born of organic material, thought to have been, you know, seeping out of the old gods. And these, you know, they evolved from that. They're in a very primal era of Azeroth. So when the old gods, you know, when they had the Black Empire, and then the Titan Forge come through and just wrecked it, the Akir kind of drove underground. You know, they kind of seek sanctity under the crust. That's kind of where they remained until Kithrix, or should I say Kithix, is he kind of was reawakened, right? Much longer later, like a millennia later. When he woke up, he was kind of completely focused on seeking vengeance and, you know, anything that was not insectoid life on the entirety that was the continent of Kalimdor. They were the most obsessed with killing the trolls. But again, they fell to their demise, and they split kind of into three little sub-colonies. The first one that we've come to see is the Mantids, and they're in Mantives, out in Pandaland, in Pandaria. Then we have the Karaji, that we were all really introduced to in vanilla. You know, they're in Ankaraj. But the Nerubians were in as John the Rube. Years later, they kind of, you know, knowing where they're from, they now serve who we all know and just defeated as N'Zoth. So eventually, due to the trolls' complete drive and focus, the Akiri kingdom split, and half of its citizens are the ones that went far north. But the Troll Empires kind of divided, even split that up and discovered and overthrew the Tolvir Society. The Akir kind of got that back. And then that's when they went to Northrend. The Akir would eventually become the race, the main Akir is what we now know as the Nerubians. They've kind of taken Tolvir's architecture. If you notice, they have that weird, that ancient structures of pyramids. They also traveled south and ransacked the old Titan research station, was it down in Aldham? The Karaji, on the other hand, they kind of, they call their new home, Anchorage. Some point after becoming Nerubians, their society broke away and opposed the old gods. For, the ones that, they opposed the ones that served the Akir, specifically Icecrown, right? And Icecrown is he's one of the 4 old gods. He kind of is mysterious, and he's this dreaded elder being, right? He was basically defeated by the armies of the Titans during the Primal Ages. So then the Pantheon took him out, and then Icecrown was imprisoned inside Ulduar, which is where we all get to meet him for the first time. That would become later become the continent that is Northrend. The split happened early enough in the Nerubian history that by the time Arthas came around as the Lich King, Anubarak said, he kind of thought that they were only legend until he met Anubarak. For those of you who don't know who Nerubian is, he's the boss at the end of Asdrul Nerub in the dungeon. But Nerubian was the last king of the Nerubians. He's kind of substantial. He was the last king of the Nerubian Empire in Asdrul Nerub. He was among the Nerubians that were slaughtered during the War of the Spider, and then was later raised by Ner'zhul in the Lich King as this undead Crypt Lord. And he was kind of there to do the Lich King's bidding. He kind of assisted him in reaching Icecrown before Illidan's forces. And then for years, the undead Nerubian continued out carrying their master's will. And then they started by their roots of being subterranean went underground, right? Then they tried to plague the Argent Tournament. And then the so-called Traitor King met his final end at the hands of adventurers partaking in the tournament, i.e. you and your instance group. One thing I find substantial about Anubarak is that's the first mention in major canon lore that references a pack of partying adventurers to take out I feel Anubarak is kind of major lore because you interact with him more than once as a boss. He's not by any means someone to just think, oh yeah, he's just a spider. No, you see him quite a few times. He's more than just a hulking beetle. He's more than just, the guy at the bottom right of my screen. So after the Argent Tournament, the Vrykro King, right, Magnar, what was it, Icebreaker, I think it was? Or Magnar Icebreaker. He kind of earned his name from the battles against the Nerubians in Northrend. He was hunting nests, just kind of wiping out insectoid nests one at a time, and he discovered cracks in the glacier walls that could be turned into tunnels, and allowed him to dig a little deeper. And he found himself amongst these fortresses, these strongholds. And then they would, from there attack with surprise assaults. A long time later, Nerubian armies kind of adapted, they were trying to seize Ulduar and adapt to the Titan machinery that was in there. Magnar, who was now the king, he was welding the scale of the Earth Warder. Now, if you guys don't remember what that is the shield of, it was the legendary shield of Prot Warriors in Legion. Yeah, it was his shield. Magnar Icebreaker's shield is the Prot shield. Just for reference, he led people against the insectoids, and he kind of pushed them back into the entrance that was Azjal Nerub down in Dragonblight. Okay, so he defeated them so thoroughly that they kind of just stopped all aggression for hundreds of years. But touching on the War of the Spider, that was the conflict between these undead armies that recently Lich King, brought up, and then the forces of the insectoid, like this, the living sectoid, Nerubian Empire of Azjal Nerub. The war began when the Nerubians, dwelling in their little subterranean kingdom, if you will, underneath Northrend, they kind of launched. They attacked Arthas first. They attacked the Lich King first. And he could raise and command undead, and bring them up in the Scourge. Their attack was in response to Lich King's attempt to lay claim to the entirety of the Northrend continent. They're like, no, this is our home too. Kill it. It just didn't go as they planned. He launched, Arthas launched this massive assault on the insectoid's underground capital, which is still to this day Azjal Nerub. Then you have, Kilix the Unraveler. Kind of during this invasion, the Nerubians, they kind of inadvertently woke up the Faceless Ones. And the Faceless Ones are the tentacled, I think they resemble elephants, that you see in like the Old Kingdom, right? They are minions of Yogg-Saron, and they're kind of at the heart of their empire. So now they're caught between two powerful enemies. The Nerubian Empire was overwhelmed and destroyed. Following those Nerubians, once they fell, the Lich King used his necromancy to bring a big majority of their dead into his ranks, and subsequently kind of adapted their architectural style as his own. Once a new rank was risen, he kind of made him a chief, of sorts, if you will. Then they raised more insectoids, and they became one of the Lich King's most potent and sturdy weapons for most conflicts to come. So they served as this huge tool to Arthas's takeover of Northrend. Yeah. So go forward, 1,000 years, when Lich King extended his influence over Icecrown, the ancient kingdom of Azjal Nerub kind of sent this elite warrior guard to attack Icecrown and end Arthas's this mad notion he had for dominance, right? So Ner'zhul, kind of just mad and frustrated, he found out that the evil Nerubians were not just unaffected by the undead plague, but also to the telepathic domination. So they're kind of special in that regard. It's two different ways that power was usually flexed and completely rendered useless. So you take the Nerubian Spider Lords, right? They kind of commanded vast forces that had this underground network that stretched nearly half of the width of the entirety of Northrend. Another one of those web-like subterranean structures. They're kind of sneaky, right? So being spiders, they're more hit run. They do that over the strongholds of Lich King for the longest time. And it kind of stymies its effort to root them out from time to time. So Ner'zhul's war against the Nerubians was won by attrition. And then, because, Ner'zhul had the Dreadlords and the innumerable undead, So when the Lich King invaded Asjal Nerub, it brought his little, he brought the entirety of the subterranean temples kind of collapsing in themselves. So the Spire Lords kind of just watched everything crumble onto them, and were left there. So even though they're immune to the plague, Nerzul's growing necro powers allowed him to, raise them after death. And that's when they become theirs. He adopted them, and Nerzul himself adopted them, the Nerubians, and their architecture style for his own structures. And you see that, throughout history. It kind of plays into Nerzul's little storyline. You see these little pockets of Nerub warriors left, but they're still kind of hell-bent on revenge. And they wanted that against Nerzul, because all they wanted at the end of the day was to have their little subterranean kingdom and just be left alone, let them hunt, kill, and breed and do what they will. But they kept being forced into a type of slavery, But during the war, there was a Nerubian by the name of Vorus Arak. He led this brood underground, right? He was an awesome tunneler. He was a swarm lord. And his people dug. And they were kind of so broken and shattered, they were forced to eat their own young because they were so starved. They eventually found this island, and they called it the Skittering Hollow. It was a place where they kind of survived and flourished. They became the Vorukar. We've seen them mentioned, but there's nothing too elaborate on them yet. And that's what I'm looking forward to, see where they take the Vorukar. So during Wrath of the Lich King, right, as we're going through the years of the game, Wrath of the Lich King was really, as far as Nerubians go, was their biggest introduction, because only in vanilla we saw the Baraji. BC, it was a broken Draenor. So the only thing I could really think there would be any sort of similarity whatsoever is those little Ravagers. Only because they're an insect, but they're not sentient. They don't have personal thought. They don't have language. They don't have culture. So looking at Lich King, once they're the Nerubian Viziers, they were risen to power, they served this unseen emperor, this deity who, he was kind of destined to lead the ancient spider people, and kind of help them with the victory over the Scourge. But they don't really talk about that too much in Wrath. So then you go to Kilix the Unraveler, or Archmage Landalock, and the Nerubians fought the Scourge. They dug deeper underground. They kept going underground as they lost ground to the undead. Kilix, or Archmage Landalock, he goes, he says, we inadvertently expose the tendril of the old god's will, which was made manifest in the creatures known only as the Faceless, which, again, the big elephant-looking tentacle, twisted, faceless dudes. Essentially, think of the last boss of Old Kingdom, right? He's one of the Faceless. He goes on and says that in the end, we could not fight two fronts again, such a powerful enemy, and their misfortune kind of cost them the war of the undead, and ultimately their home, implying that the Nerubians discovered the Faceless Ones by accident, which has been, that's been told. Tekin Tor acquired the crown of the Nerubian king and put it aside for the Nerubians whenever they decided to coronate a new one, since Anubarak had fallen. Going forward in the Cataclysm, you kind of see that it's kind of revealed that Nerubians have like this enormous secret stash of their own eggs hidden safely, so that after the wipeout of the Scourge from Asjal Nerub, they can finally begin repopulating, which is, again, interesting to see where that goes, because in today's world we know that the Scourge have kind of evolved or changed paths, if you will. So going past Cataclysm, we go into Battle for Azeroth, where The Skittering Hollow, which is the home of the Vorakar, was visited by both Horde and Alliance, while we were focusing on getting our Azerite. It's possible for them to fight, you know, it was possible for us to fight part of the Brood as well as the Vorasarak. I think his carapace was revealed to have never been shed since the War of the Spider. And it kind of returned to Northrend to Kilixi and Raveler, the first boss in Azjal Nerub. Claim that the history of the Nerubians are important to them, but for rewarding any adventurer with Azerite. So the Nerubians were summoned to aid Zekvaz after he escaped his imprisonment, right? These Nerubians were created by Zekvaz using corrupted Titan discs, and such they're the only Nerubians still loyal to the old gods because they knew their creation, they knew where they came from. But they too were kind of slain next to the Akir. But you have all these little factors, it seems like they're kind of the underdog, but they're not because they never have really risen to the next challenge. It's like they're just fragile enough to have the threatening numbers and the intelligence and the practices, but can just never get collectively enough to overtake any, they've never really won the fight, yeah. So if you think of Naxxramas, you think about it, there's an entire dedicated spider wing. And Kel'Thuzad, he claimed that the Nerubians were highly intelligent, fiercely intelligent, if you will. And they would be dedicated to wipe out anyone not like themselves. Kind of the same mindset of the Akir. So the legends say that the Nerubians use the Jormungar, which are those giant worms, the big furry worms that pop out all over Northrend. They kind of brought them on board as creatures of labor, forced them to carve the massive tunnels throughout Northrend's entire, subterranean pipeline. And they kind of laid the groundwork for the Nerubian ancient civilizations. So the Jormungar hide they were a pivotal part. Because they were so big, they could carve those tunnels out. They also enslaved the remaining Tol'vir out in Northrend. They kind of turned them into those obsidian destroyers that we've come across. They were later claimed by the Scourge during the War of the Spider. Even though many of them were remaining as Tol'vir slaves, they died kind of during the front lines of the third war. It's possible that there's more obsidian destroyers still in existence, but they're only found in, the deep remains of Azjal Nerub. I still personally feel Azjal Nerub and the Nerubians as a whole, we are not done dealing with them yet. We'll find out Tuesday if we see them as somewhere in the Shadowlands expansion. I would honestly hope so, being that they're created from the old gods, and we're going to the Shadowlands to pursue not only finally kill Sylvanas, but to see what the next tale in that stretch of events is. So in the sacrificial, I got off track, sorry. Going back to Azjal Nerub, in the sacrificial pits of Azjal, they were used a long time ago to sacrifice enemy forces in exchange for a success in battle, right? So in the Nerubian culture, it reminds me of like an Egyptian or Mesopotamian culture in terms of architecture, and they have these giant ziggurats that are a completely different design than most things you see. And it's attested that by many traps and contraptions in the dungeons, in Azjal Nerub, they obviously had to be great engineers at one point. It's a substantial type of architecture that they as a society have developed. If the Lich King was, they had adapted it. And after the War of the Spider, so the ziggurats in the big necropolises, like Naxxramas and Archers, referred to their building style. So they gave them credit, saying that most of the architecture, it can still be, you can see it in Azjal Nerub itself. You see, even in the Old Kingdom, you see it a little bit. Another good example of their style is the statue in the Pit of Fiends. So being that they're such a, a smart, a highly intelligent race, there's got to be more to them. So they have their own language. It's just simply put, it's nothing exaggerated. It's just Nerubian. That's how Chieftain Wintergale says it. It's just this ancient, harsh, and to the point language that you would think most ancient races, both real world and WoW, they're kind of crude, but they're effective. It sounds harsh, but it gets the point across. That's all. If you think about it, that's all communication is. If something's spoken and it's understood, that's communication. So you only need that grassroots floor, to develop a known language. So among the Nerubians, you got the Nerubian Guardians. They're a little bit higher. You have the Vorokar, and then you have Asjal Anak. Among the Scourge corrupted Nerubians, that's when you have the Ankahar, you have the Anubar, you have the Hathar, you have Nerubazar, or Nerubar, and Nerubis. So, as far as the history of that goes, if you look all through Kalimdor, right? In Kalimdor's center, there was this mysterious lake. Like, it had all these glowy little incandescent energies. We all call it the Well of Eternity. It was kind of the true heart of the world's natural power. And that's where the first, now here's another word you've heard before, there's where the Silithid were born. And as Sethune fell, right, and Courage, they recognized their appearance. He attempted to sunder the world that it once held in this unmerciful grip, right? So the old god created avatars from the Silithid in his own image. That's what we would know today as the Karaji. So if you go back 16,000 years, literally, before the invasion of the Orcish invasion of Azeroth, the Akir ruled the lands. Far west of Kalimdor, right? These little insectoids were super smart, and they were greatly expansionistic, almost nomadic, because they would move so fast. But the problem with the Akir is they were incredibly evil. They were just so hell-bent on revenge, on anything, not just non-arthropod, but the trolls. The two big troll empires back then were the Amani and the Gurubashi. So they were just so found as a common enemy that it kind of developed into the Third Empire, the nation of Akir. Now that being said, the Nerubians were kind of embittered. They were kind of depleted. They most of them still live in Northrend, and they kind of shun all contact with outsiders. They attack any intruder that comes into them on sight, and they kind of treat everyone with suspicion, which is understandable after all the crap they've gone through. But they possess this vitrolic hatred of undead, because that's who they fought when the Lich King was trying to turn the tides and bring Northrend under his own power, and then use the same, necromancy to raise them back when it wasn't wanted. So now they kind of content themselves, and it was their own version of like this pathetic little guerrilla warfare. Nowadays, the Nerubians really only exist as scattered little families in northern Kalimdor and a few settlements through Ashenvale. They're kind of, they really don't have a passion for anything. They're kind of passionless. They despise the undead, and they'll take any, going forward, they'll take any opportunity they can to harm the undead. But Asjal Narum contained these huge, massive libraries of literature, philosophy, lore of the arcane. And every once in a while, the kingdom would kidnap humans and elves to experiment on. So there's a little bit of a disdain there also, right? Nerubians are probably one of the most cruel, and even though I hate this word, it's completely appropriate, one of the most xenophobic races in the entirety of Azeroth. In the entirety of WoW, really. They like the Silithids because, like the Silithids, they're kind of hostile to every other race. But within their little world, they still hold a society. And there's different types that are referred to as castes with a lifelong occupation and responsibility to societies. Like you'll see Nerubian seers, right? They're highly advanced Nerubians who act as priests, or you'll see them as mages. And then you have like the Spider Lords. They kind of rule the society in the same mold as aristocrats, right? They're like the aristocrat equivalent are the Spider Lords. So if you look at the undead Nerubians, they're usually under control by the Scourge and is known as Crypt Fiends. At least in the case of most Nerubians. And Crypt Lords, which are the undead Spider Lords. There aren't really a lot of Crypt Fiends that appear in Azeroth, so really no one knows yet what Nerubian females look like or what they're called. There just hasn't been one. So before that question's asked, we just don't know. But they came from somewhere because they have the egg horde. You know, it's kind of like a seed farm or a seed bank. They just have these. You know, if you think of any female dragon, we see the clutches of eggs. So even though Nerubians tend toward evil, and they've always been ruthless and aggressive, and since the fall of the Spider Kingdom, these traits have become more pronounced. But Nerubians are intelligent. Not all of them fall in these dark practices. They might join a group of adventurers in hope of striking against the Lich King or gaining power to do so. And often young Nerubians, they kind of leave their homes because they don't want any part of their people's hopeless conflict. So we might see a rise of Nerubians that might someday become almost an ally, if you will. Maybe they want to attain like an individual level, at least. The heights of their people that was once possessed, like they have this little remote possibility that exists. A handful of Nerubians are not evil and can get along with other races better than their brethren, which is substantial, especially after all that time. And that's possible because Nerubians are fluent in Common as well as their own language. And Nerubian is just a simple, you would think of any bug, a clicking, raspy language. But they can also speak Draconic. They can speak Dwarven. They can speak Low Common, Thalassian, Zendali. You see a lot of Nerubians out in Zandalar. So that being said, and the fact that they have priests, that means they have faith, right? You can't be a priest in practice if you don't have a faith to go on. And that comes from the ancient times of Azjal Nerub, right? They were 5 or 6 schools of religious thought, I believe. There was like these theological debates even back then, you know, of debates being a fairly common thing. But Nerubians, they kind of came to the conclusion that worshiping a creature that was beyond the world is insane. So it's really the first mention also in the world of any type of non-belief structure. They kind of had this seer named, Ultaman. He said, makes as much sense as a fly caught in a web worshiping the spider who is about to devour him, right? So to modern Nerubians, even the concept of worship itself is kind of alien. Nerubians were once controlled by arachnithids that used them as guardians in Azjal Nerub before the Scourge came. And I think it was BlizzCon 2007? Somebody made a reference that the old gods and the Nerubians were BFFs. So you have that going for you at least. This is kind of ironically almost the exact opposite of every depiction the Nerubians were ever shown with their former masters. The only instance of Nerubian Old God Alliance is shown, as I said earlier, was with Zekvaz, where the Nerubians have synthesized and have no actual connection to the rest of the Nerubians otherwise in Azeroth. And of course, Azjot Lanak originally had a much smaller presence than shown in current incarnations of Nerubian Dungeons when it was first released. But originally, the only member of the group were the Azjot Lanak Battlegrounds and Kilix the Unraveler. And that was expanded in a later patch. It was like patch 4 point something. And that added the additional quests and members of the faction, including their new leader, their newest leader, Seer Ixit. Chris Metzen said that despite the concept of there being more Nerubians was something established before it was added into the game, there are still pockets of Nerubians down there literally fighting for their lives. And we have any number of plans about how they play into things. What are they about? Are they principled? Even worse in some ways than the Scourge itself? Straight from the words of Chris Metzen. So going forward, I hope that next time you see a Nerubian, you think, wow, this thing really wants me to die. And have little to no compassion when you slice that bony, stick-thin exoskeleton to complete shreds and laying it to waste as you consider, where to go next throughout your grand adventure in this leveling of this wonderful World of Warcraft that we all inhabit together. That being said, I think we covered all that we can. So I guess I only have a question for you guys. Where do we go from here, right? Do you want to cover another race? As I said, the most common of requests was, questions that I saw in the emails and the DMs and the tags was, what are the Nerubians? Yeah. What do you guys want to know? Let's try it again. Let's see where we go as far as reactions and what we get. I hope that everyone's enjoying their adventures and listening pleasure so far. But yeah, I just love this stuff, man. But be sure if anybody wants to know when things are coming out or what's going on, you can find me on, you can find Baron's Chat on Instagram under Baron's Chat Podcast, or on Twitter for Baron's Podcast. Of course, myself is on all platforms as who I am, Ziggy Salvation. But yeah, let's keep it rolling. As we've played this game for 16, officially 16, some of us 17, some of us even 18 years, there's lots of little facets of races that we see all the time, or even characters, even NPCs that we see that don't realize there's such a vastness in their backstory. So let's talk about it. I will see you guys next week. Thursdays have been the newest dates. It seems to have been working well, and I will definitely have the YouTube up tonight. In fact, if you're watching right now, you could be on that very channel. But I will see you guys next week. I'll be back shortly. I'm going to be over on on my personal channel, twitch.tv/Ziggy Salvation. And we're doing the Icecrown event. Yeah, we're killing the rares to see if we can get the accursed drop from the rares to have the new version of the pendant with the targetless shade that haunts you as you adventure around. Again, thank you everyone for stopping by, and I will see you again.